Hello and welcome back to Brief Encounters. Our guest today is Preethi Gowda, a distinguished legal professional specializing in international trade law and economic policy. She holds an LLM in international business and economic law from Georgetown University Law Center, where she was awarded the prestigious John Jackson Memorial Trade Scholarship. Additionally, she earned a certificate in World Trade Organization Studies, further cementing her expertise in global trade regulations. Her career spans academia, research, and legal practice, with contributions to the Stimson Center, the Institute of International Economic Law, and the Center on Inclusive Trade and Development. She has authored over 50 publications covering international trade law, economic policy, and sustainable development, influencing legal discourse and policymaking. With a blend of academic rigor, policy insight, and legal expertise, she is shaping the future of international trade law and economic governance, and we are excited to explore her inspiring journey today. Hello and welcome to Brief Encounters. It is such an honor having you on our podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you for this invitation. It's my first time giving such an interview. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thanks to you as well as Project LLM for having me on this podcast and thinking that I might be a good fit for being one of your guests.
Oh, definitely. Your profile is it's so encouraging, it's so inspirational. You were definitely one of our perfect guests. So now this is a question that we ask almost all our guests. What initially drew you to this field, and how did your early experiences shape your decision to pursue legal studies?
Sure. So my earliest inspiration to pursue law actually comes from my paternal grandfather, and he was what I like to call a half lawyer. And I say this because he attended law school in Bangalore, but due to various responsibilities at home, he never had the opportunity to complete his degree. His passion for the field, always resonated with my own. And interestingly, and I would say paradoxically, I come from a family of doctors. Both my parents are in the medical profession. So this was something that wasn't a very obvious path for me. All of these experiences sort of went on with me to high school, where I was deeply involved in several Model United Nations competitions, public speaking activities, and it was all of these decisions that really solidified my interest to pursue law. I found myself mostly drawn to debates, negotiations, and finding out the intricacies of, how international relations, international law really works, all of which sort of naturally just fit in within the legal field. And when the time to make my career decision really came, I had absolute clarity on what I didn't want to do and not what I wanted to do. And that was medicine and engineering. Like both of these fields, like I felt like what a terrible professional I'd make if I would get into them. So I was more inclined to subjects like economics, legal studies, and business management. And I'm a firm believer of the fact that one should always pursue what truly excites them. And for me, that was law. So I just followed this passion and I haven't looked back since. No regrets either.
Wow, so it was a passion which solidified into a profession that you want to do later.
You can call it that.
Right. So, for young law graduates who are exploring their options, Christ University is a very strong contender. So, based on your time there, what do you see as its unique strengths and key advantages? And additionally, when it comes to undergrad studies, are there any aspects that prospective study students should be mindful about?
So, in my opinion, I think Christ University really laid down the foundation for the person I am today. I was initially quite keen to get into an NLU and pursue law at an NLU, and I can confidently today say that Christ proved to be a stronger alternative, if not for NLUs. One of its standout features is the state-of-the-art library, which I believe which should be one of the most important considerations any prospective law student really needs to consider while choosing a law school, because that's where we lawyers thrive. And Christ is also equipped with several committees and clubs to engage with, whether it's international relations and foreign policy, legal aid, and gender policy. Christ really has it all. In hindsight, these were some of the most important factors that made Christ the right choice for me. And another key advantage is the university's strong alumni network, with many graduates now placed internationally and excelling in their respective fields. So, For prospective students, here are I would say a 5-point checklist that they need to sort of keep in mind when they're choosing a law school. The first and foremost being the kind of library that the law school hosts, and I cannot emphasize on this enough. The second thing would be the network of alumni that we would have access to, not just during our studies, but also after we graduate. And then the third thing would be definitely the experience and faculty profiles within the university and where exactly they have completed their education, the kind of experience they hold, all of that. The fourth one being the opportunities that would really open up right after graduation. I do know a lot of people tend to think of having a good placement cell as the most important consideration, but I don't think that that is the only deciding factor. We must also keep in mind how we can leverage alumni network and then broaden our opportunities. And then lastly, I would say location, because as much as we talk of all the other four categories, it's also important that we keep in mind location, because that's also where we need to look at where we find our internships, the kind of networking that we're doing, and the kind of exposure that we're getting. Ultimately, choosing the right law school is really about finding an institution that supports both academic as well as professional growth. And I think Christ University, for me, offered this well rounded platform to help students build a strong foundation for their legal careers.
That is very true. I think you gave the exact right checklist. I really wish I had something of this sort when I was choosing my undergrad situation. So you have interned at several prestigious firms, and out of all of these law firms, obviously, one of your unique associations has been with OutLawed India, as I had noticed on your LinkedIn profile. Could you share more about this organization? What drew you to work with them on such a recurring basis? And a sort of non traditional experience, not something that all law students would look into. Do these non traditional experiences play a role when it comes to LL applications?
So I'll answer your last question first, and I would say yes, and then I'll justify it as to why I'm saying yes to that. Why you would need to have a very non-traditional experience on your resume. So OutLawed India is basically an NGO dedicated to enabling last mile justice delivery. So it was founded in 2019 by a law student, Vibha Nadig, who envisioned an India where, every citizen could independently engage with the law and justice enforcement authorities. I became involved with them at the very outset of the pandemic, which was around March 2020. And then I ended up contributing to all of their initiatives well into 2022 as well. What initially drew me to this organization was its mission about making law and legal tools very accessible to everyone. At OutLawed, my role was predominantly revolving around content creation, where I had to really break down all the complex legal concepts, all of the big regulations and acts into layman's terms. And when I say layman's terms, I mean literally to the last word possible. Like, how exactly can I break this down? Apart from this, I also had to engage with a lot of various stakeholders, not just people unfamiliar with the law, but also several teenagers and young adults who had limited access to education due to the pandemic itself. And one of the biggest challenges that I encountered during this endeavor was, although I was able to translate complex legal topics into, layman terms, I had a really tough time expressing this in my own mother tongue, for instance. And I made sure that whatever I'm thinking in terms of how I've broken it down, I convey the same thing in different regional languages. So this was also part of the work that we did at OutLawed. And I think the pandemic also exposed a lot of policy gaps and challenges in education and access to justice policies, and OutLawed really made a meaningful impact. Being part of that organization sort of aligned so closely with my own personal goal of creating social impact was incredibly fulfilling. This experience, no doubt, played crucial role in my summer school as well as my LLM applications. As you might have noted, most of the application processes tend to ask you what you can give and not what you can take. And I think in that particular aspect, I had a solid answer of telling people that here's what I did, here was what the impact was, and this is what that I had to put into the society. And it's not just about me taking from the university, but I can also give back. I can also ensure that my work really has impact in the society.
Wow. That's quite an interesting take. And even OutLawed as an NGO, it sounds like such an interesting place to be at, and it has such a unique idea towards actually making law accessible, especially focus with the pandemic. So you have done great internships, both traditional and non-traditional. How did you balance the quality versus the quantity of internships when it comes to building a strong legal profile? And do you believe that besides these internships, other co-curricular activities like mooting, conferences, do they play a significant role when it comes to shaping a legal career?
So, if you have a look at my profile, you'll notice a diverse range of internship experiences. This includes working at prestigious law firms, gaining in house exposure at an alcohol manufacturing company, contributing to NGOs, and even interning at the Times of India. Each of these opportunities really allowed me to explore different aspects of the legal field and where law really intersects with society and various other aspects that are all interconnected, and we cannot like sort of divorce them from the law. All of this ultimately helped me discover my niche. For me, the focus has always been on the quality of the experiences rather than simply, accumulating them. Every internship brought something unique to the learning journey, and that's really what mattered. While most of my peers at the time prioritized securing as many prestigious law firm internships as they could, I chose to move at my own pace, ensuring that each experience that I gained had something that added value. At the same time, it had like a good, meaningful impact. So during my first year of law school, I clearly remember spending a lot of time exploring various avenues, whether it could be research, it could be mooting or paper publications, just to sort of understand where exactly I fit in. This was also because since I'm a first generation lawyer, I think this is also something that I wanted to do for myself, not by having to take any hasty decisions right before I jump into anything. So it wasn't until my third year of law school that I really realized my inclination towards writing and working on policy related issues. And when I mean policy related issues, I mean just sort of reading all the policies or reading regulations and understanding gaps or pulling out gaps from these regulations and saying, hey, here's a problem, please look at it. And once I recognized this, I started seeking out opportunities that aligned with these interests, which eventually led me to roles at the Times of India and various other research consulting firms. So while I believe that internships are crucial, and so are co-curricular activities like moots, conferences, and publications, I also believe that it is important to take things at your own pace. Don't just jump into something because everyone else is doing it. Just sort of have to figure out for your own self where exactly you fit in and what really comes to you very naturally. I think I'm a strong believer of that. And I think that's something that's helped me develop a lot of good skills such as critical thinking, research, and even to some extent how we extract like subject matter expertise. Ultimately, it's all about striking the right balance, choosing experiences that align with your interests, and also contributing to your professional growth. I really don't think having several internships, let's say like about 10 or 15 internships in the span of 5 years, would really help anyone unless and until you've had something to learn from that, had something to give back to the society from that.
I think that's great, and I feel like I think you've connected with a lot of listeners when you say this because in law school all we see is the number of internships most people are doing, like, oh, you have like 15, 20, and that sense of FOMO is always there, that, oh, maybe I'm not doing equivalent to that. But seeing your journey, seeing how, while of course you did a lot of great internships, you have diversified your field into so many others, you are still at a position where you're stating that, quality over quantity. So I think that's some really great advice. That's something that people should definitely keep in mind. You attended the Hague Academy of International Law for a summer program in private international law. So, how did this experience influence your legal perspective, and how did the application process for Hague differ from the LLM application?
So, attending this summer school at the Hague Academy of International Law is something that I would like to call as a mini LLM. And it sort of prepared me for the long-term journey that was to be coming ahead. And this was indeed one of the most rewarding and most fulfilling professional experiences that I've had. Not only did I have a professional career transformation, but I also had a personal career transformation. Like, I learned so many other life skills that I would have otherwise never learned if I were still in Bangalore, still in India. And so this was one thing that really drew me to the private international law summer school. Was to some extent during third year and fourth year of law school, while we were reading public international law courses, I sort of got drew into international trade law itself as an area of study. And I realized that that particular year, when I was applying to the summer school, there were about 3 very definitive lectures on international trade law. So I said, okay, let's give it a shot. It's okay if I don't get selected. I've got nothing to lose. I will just anyways make the application and go ahead for it. So I did that anyways, and then Hague materialized. So it was when I went to Hague, and then I started learning more about international trade law, how trade law itself can be a tool for sustainable development. It sort of prompted me to think further and then think about how I would sort of even pursue my LLM. In fact, this particular experience of mine at Hague also helped me do my dissertation in the final year of law school. Like, I wrote my dissertation on international trade law, and I think Hague had a big part of the credit that I would like to give. So, how the application process really differed was, I wouldn't say there was a significant sort of very huge difference, but the only fine line of difference was how we drafted our application or the SOP. The thing with Hague summer school was it was a shorter program. It was something way more intensive than an LLM because you have to do about 10 courses within a span of 1 month. So the only thing that we had to write differently was how we would be able to tell people, or at least the admission committee, as to how we are able to cope up with all of that and how we would be able to contribute to any of the research endeavors within the summer school program. On the other hand, when it was writing for an LLM application, it was also trying to sort of write a very well-woven story, I would say, because I remember writing what led me to law school, what I did in law school, and then what is now leading me to the LLM, that I want to pursue it at this time, and what after. So this whole well-woven story wasn't really required in the Hague Academy application because it was more focused on why do you want to do this summer school, or what are you going to get out of this summer school? How do you think you can contribute to any of the research endeavors that the summer school is willing to offer for you? So it was more on, like, I would say summer school was more of a short application goal, whereas LLM was more of a long-term application goal. And I definitely remember spending way more time working on my LLM application than on my summer school application.
I mean, that makes sense. But now that we've spoken about your Hague experience, we can move on to the LLM. So, beginning with what motivated you to pursue an LLM and that too abroad, and what led you to pursue a postgraduate degree immediately after your undergrad instead of getting some work experience? Because I think that's a debate in the legal world a lot.
So, like I said, I think Hague Academy sort of pushed me to do my LLM. And like I say, the summer school was really a mini LLM for me, where I got to experience how living abroad felt and how studying abroad felt. So that was really one turning point in my life where I really decided to go ahead and pursue my LLM also abroad. And the second reason that I wanted to pursue my LLM abroad was, so during my dissertation research that was I was going through, I happened to quote several professionals in the international trade law field, whom later on I happened to work with at Georgetown. So that was something that for me was like, okay, if I had the chance to at least like do this, do my dissertation, and then after that I even had the slightest chance of meeting them, and I knew the only way for this was to pursue my LLM abroad. The second reason why I wanted to pursue my LLM was abroad was I've always been aspiring to work at any of the international organizations, be it the World Bank, be it the WTO, or even the United Nations, for example. So I knew that, once I graduate from any of the law schools overseas, this was something like a door that opens for me. And it was also like, after having done so much research about all the various LLM programs that all these universities had to offer, it was something that I was very sure of, that I knew, okay, this was some door that's going to open and I'm going to pursue that door with all my heart and soul. So those were really the two main reasons why I chose to pursue my LLM abroad. And speaking of gaining work experience right after law school versus, just going right after undergraduate studies, I think this is a very subjective question, and this would warrant also a subjective answer. Like, if you would ask some of my peers at Georgetown who have like 10 or 15 years of experience and then coming back to school, they will tell you, well, you know what, I've had a great time working, gaining all that experience, but now that I'm back in school, I can't for the life of me get myself to sit in a place and just study. But on the other hand, for someone like me who just came right after undergrad to pursue my master's, this was something more easier. Like, this was something for me which came to me very naturally. Like, I didn't have to put much effort into it. It just happened. But on the other hand, the cons of really pursuing post-graduation right after law school in India, I would say, would be not having enough experience. And that really becomes a big roadblock, especially when we're trying to look for opportunities. But while I say this, I also say this with some amount of caveat, and I say that, okay, well, I know of people who have still just graduated from law school, came to do their masters, and still ended up finding a job. So it's really all upon you as to how you see this. So if you see yourself as competition to the people who have 10 years or 15 years of experience, one thing is sure, that you're never going to make it to where you want to make it, because I've seen a lot of people tell me that, you know what, you don't have experience, you're not going to get a job. I said, well, if that's the case, then I don't really know how things are going to turn out for me, but I will look at myself as a very unique person in the LLM cohort. I will not look at myself as competition, and I will only see how all of this could translate to wherever my career takes. I think it's also about having a lot of openness to whatever life throws at you, because over the past few months, that's something that I've come to learn very naturally.
Right. So I think you've explained it extremely well with regards to the pros and cons of both. And in the end, it warrants the very basic answer, I think, as any law student or lawyer would say, it depends. It depends on the situation. It depends what you want. And yeah, I think that's great. So after you made the decision that you want to study abroad, what was your next step when it came to the decision-making process? Did you prioritize the country, the course specialization, university ranking, or were there any other factors that were involved?
So the first and foremost factor I considered was the course, because very few universities across the world offer something like a very tailored international trade law program. And I was very keen on doing an international trade law program, because in my undergraduate dissertation, I sort of explored various areas of trade law that really prompted me and said, okay, if we're looking at sustainable development, or if we're looking at climate change, if we're looking at economic empowerment, what is the role of trade and all of this? So this was something that was constantly at the back of my head. So, and then when I was trying to do this, I was pretty sure that, well, if I'm choosing for a trade law program, then my options are naturally going to be limited. And it wasn't like I had so many universities to apply to. I might have applied to just about 10 universities in total, 10 or maybe 15 universities in total. So that was something that was really my top priority as to the course and how the course itself is designed. Because if I had to do the same trade law LLM that I did in Georgetown, maybe in Geneva, I would have to do it differently. I'd maybe have to learn a foreign language. So these were some of my biggest considerations. And the second thing was really location. I knew for a fact that I'm definitely not going to the UK. I'm not going to Canada. Because I know for Canada, I can say, like, I'm not a person who survives winters, and winters being so harsh, I would say, like, definitely no Canada. And UK, the other reason was I knew, like, there is no headquarter of any international organization in the UK. So I knew like my avenues would then sort of, become. And I definitely had clarity on where I didn't want to go. So that sort of again checked some boxes off that said, okay, if I know where I don't want to go, then I will have to then see where I can go. So that was something that I eventually started doing. And then, of course, a lot of research. So I spent about almost 8 to 9 months just researching universities, reaching out to professors in these universities, cold emailing a lot of professors in these universities, also speaking to admission representatives, asking them a lot of right questions, asking them exactly how the program was designed, whether it was the perfect fit for me. And all of these things sort of really, solidified my whole interest to choose the right university. And then I don't believe in the fact that, if it's like the most top ranked university, it's going to make you like the best individual that is out there. It's really about the person that sort of you see, because a lot of people have told me, well, you're not from an NLU, like how do you think you can really make your mark in the legal field? I said I don't think that matters. So long as you have the right skills, so long as you have the right perspective and the right outlook towards your professional growth, I don't think that really matters. So I think these top three considerations or factors were very important for me. So if I had to summarize it in like a checklist sort of format, first thing I would say course, specialization and course design, all of that just falls under one bullet. The second thing would be location. And the third thing would really be, like growth after graduation.
Right. All right. So thank you so much for the checklist. I think that's a great way to go about making any particular decision. But what was your checklist like? I mean, I'm sure you would have received admission offers from multiple places considering the applications you have sent out. What key factors influenced your decision and what ultimately led you to choose Georgetown Law?
To be honest, when I made this checklist for myself, Georgetown was really like a backup plan. I never really meant to go to Georgetown at the very outset. My front runners for pursuing my LLM abroad was obviously Geneva Graduate Institute in Geneva and World Trade Institute at Bern. That's because both of these universities really had a very catered trade law program, and I was very keen on doing that. And on the other hand, I was also looking at these universities because they were also something that sort of gave me a more well-rounded perspective of how the course design would look like. So when I made the checklist, first thing was, of course, course design. And then, so when I was ticking that box off, I had two options, which was Geneva Graduate Institute and World Trade Institute at Bern. The second really big checklist was geography. I do know that there was another university in Canada that was offering a similar kind of program, but then I had to cross it off my list because I know I'm not going to survive the harsh winter there for very obvious reasons. And the third thing was really, when I made this, was the faculty who are teaching there. So that was when Georgetown really caught my attention because, so the first thing was, all the people that I quoted in my undergraduate dissertation happened to be working at Georgetown. And the second biggest thing that really put Georgetown above both the other organizations was because my professor, Professor Jennifer Hillman, used to work at the WTO appellate body. So I knew for a fact that, okay, if I go to Georgetown and I'm getting to learn from her, who has like dedicated her whole life into international trade law, then that's really where I should be. So that was something that really sort of pushed the needle on why I went to Georgetown. So that was something that really, also made me think that, okay, here's where I should be. And I was also getting exposed to the network that these professors had. So yes, definitely these were the main factors. And yeah, so I also remember, like, I happened to speak to one of the university representatives who's now the Dean of Admissions, Dean 𝗵𝗿𝗀𝗻. And it was then, like, after I had that sort of comprehensive conversation with her on how the course was designed, how I could cherry pick my courses to my liking and all of this. And when I got to understand the whole process of how courses were designed. I think that time Georgetown really checked all the boxes, and then I was like, okay, let me just go ahead and apply. And I also remember that after having this, I just had about 3 days left for the application deadline. So I said, okay, now is too late, but let me just go for it. And then, yes, Georgetown materialized.
Oh my God. So it's kind of like the quote says, life is what happens when you're making other plans, and it turned out to be the perfect plan for you. So recommendation letters and SOPs are extremely important when it comes to these application process. How did you approach writing your recommendation, your statement of purpose, and how did you choose your recommenders? And what advice would you give to students about the same?
So every application for an LLM program is really sort of built upon 3 main documents. Firstly, being the statement of purpose, second, being the CV or the resume, and the third being the letter of recommendation. So it's like you're trying to weave a story through these 3 documents, where 2 documents is really your own, something that you have full control on. And the third document is really what others have to say about you and what they really have to contribute in your professional growth. So in terms of these 3 documents, so the first thing that I wanted to get sorted, sort of push out of the way, was my CV. And I remember sort of trying and testing about 10 or 15 different formats that really worked. So I sent out like my first application. I still remember it was to University of Pennsylvania. And when I did that, the first thing that happened was 2 weeks into the application window, they rejected me. I said, okay, well, I know this didn't work out. I should try something different. So when I took a different approach and I applied to a different university, I still got rejected. So it took me about 5 or 6 rejections to really come to the point where I said, okay, this is the right resume format. Here are the right bullet points that I need to be using in the resume, and here's how it needs to be presented. And the next thing was how I also drafted my SOP. So at the time when I was applying, it was quite customary for not just my parents, but a lot of other people to tell me, you know what, you should go approach an academic consultancy. They are going to help you. They're going to do like the wholesome, comprehensive drafting and all of this. And for me, it was really more of, okay, well, if they're charging me so much money, what is it that I need to put in there to write about myself? Because I really saw it as my own story. It's not like someone else has to write my story. And who knows my own story better than myself? I don't have to ask a third person to tell it for me. So I was of that belief. And then I made sure that I approach my statement of purpose in, like, again, this whole checklist format. I really like using checklists because it really sort of gets me on the right note just to ensure that I have everything on point and everything's worked out. So the first and foremost thing that I would say when you're writing your SOP or in the form of a checklist is what story you're trying to write. So make sure that whatever you have written is in your resume also resonates in the SOP. Don't make sure that it's like a carbon copy of the resume, but it's more of a sort of organic story that weaves into the resume as well as the story. The next thing is having a set of really 5 or 6 broad questions to answer within your SOP. So I wouldn't say like just right away start writing the essay as you would write a story, but then have these 6 questions, 5 to 6 questions in mind. First and foremost being, so what led you to law school? Why law? And what was your motivation? The second question being, what did you do in law school that really sort of helped you carve your niche, and why this particular field of law? Third thing is why at this point of time in your life, LLM, all of those aspirations. Fourth thing would be, see, it's not just about taking from the university, it's also about giving back to the university, giving to the community. So you also want to describe a little about that. And then the last thing would really be your post-graduation plans. Like, some of my mentors happen to tell me that, you know, it's okay to write something that you may not want to do, but I would say try to be as truthful as possible. And another really important consideration that I would say don't do is sort of also tell people not a sob story. So like, don't make it a sob story. It's not about how well you have, been able to convince them that, oh, you're like the brightest person in the class and then you had so many hardships. I mean, everyone has their own fair share of hardships, so it's not like you can dismiss anything, but it's really about writing your own story, answering these 5 questions and telling the admission committee that, well, you're made for it, and if you're made for it, why? So I think if you're able to answer all of these questions in the SOP, it just becomes much easier to get a whole well-rounded document, I would say. And then you would also want to sort of do a recheck on how it sounds coherently. The other really big thing that or a tip that I would like to give is have at least 2 or 3 people whom you trust the most. They could be your mentors, they could be your professors, they could be your friends, they could be anyone. Just have them to read the SOP. Like, just have them to read it and then also take advice from them as to what can go right or what can go wrong. The other mistake was also really that I made, I would say, was having too many people review my SOP. Like, that way I got confused myself as to what I was trying to say. Because at the end of the day, it was my own story, and it was not like I wanted someone else altogether also give me advice and then I take their advice and then it becomes like a big soup of mess. So I didn't want that to happen. So I don't think that is like that I would like to call as a mistake. And I think that is also something that I shouldn't have done.
Wow, I think that's some really, really good advice. So yeah, so in Georgetown specifically, among the 6 LLM specializations that are offered, you chose international business and economic law. Now, I think I have understood from your journey, as you've explained, international trade law was one of your favorite subjects, one of your passion subjects. But what led you to select these 2 courses over the other options? And what was this process like?
So, like I said, when I had that conversation with Dean Karen Walland at Georgetown Law, I asked her this exact question that you asked me, and I said, well, if you're letting me do all of this, then why not I choose a general studies, or why not I choose something else over the IBEL? So she told me one thing. So if there's one thing that's really unique to Georgetown, and in terms of course categorization and in terms of course selection and sort of tailoring it to your needs, it's really just the IBEL program that allows you to do that. So then my next follow-up question to her immediately was, well, okay, if you're asking me to fulfill IBEL requirements, which is having like 20 or 23 odd credits, how do you think I should also make sure that I can get the trade certificate? So then she told me, well, both of these are really interlinked. So let's say you choose a course that is, for instance, trade and sustainable development. You should understand that it ticks both the IBEL box as well as the trade certificate box. So I don't think like even Geneva Graduate Institute had this sort of a design where we could choose courses that were like 2 birds with 1 stone sort of a situation. So I think that really made a huge difference for me. The other thing that I would like to address in this question, and which sort of connected to the previous question, was, so I asked Dean Walland also about how much of a difference really does LORs make to the application. She says, well, if 85% of your application is really your story and why you're telling me why you want to do this LLM and why this point of time in your career, the 15% really tells me what others have to say about you. And that really sort of fits in, very well corroborated. And then she said, she also gave me another very important advice. So she said, it really doesn't matter who writes your letter of recommendation. It's about how much that person knows you. So it's not like you get the LOR from like the CEO of where you worked or like the managing partner of the law firm that you work for. It's more important to understand your story from a person who's directly supervised you, because it's quite natural that a managing partner might not know much about you, especially when you were an intern or when you were an associate. So it's really important to fit all of these boxes and then weave a story that sort of, so see it like a jigsaw puzzle and everything really fits in towards the end.
Right. That's some really, I think that is the right way to go about choosing these particular subjects, and it's very interesting to understand your process for the same. Now, I was going through your LinkedIn posts, and you've openly shared about the challenges of securing a post LLM work opportunities in the US, which I believe these struggles are real everywhere in the world. We're facing a job freeze almost in every place. However, this is quite overlooked and it's not talked about as much. So it was amazing to see these posts. So, with that in mind, the next few questions that we'll be discussing, we will focus on these topics specifically. So, to begin with, when did you first start your job search and what initial challenges did you encounter in this process?
So I would like to give you a little background of how gaining work experience in the US really works. So you enter the United States on a student visa or like an F1 visa, which is usually valid for about 5 years. So even though the validity is about 5 years, it depends on how long your course is and how long you or what kind of course you're enrolled in. So since law is a non-STEM course, and when I say STEM, it is a non-science tech engineering management course, we get only 1 year of work permit with the student visa. So what I mean to say is, so you finish your LLM for a year and then you have another year in hand just to gain work experience in the United States. So this is called, so the next year that you're on your student visa, it's called as the OPT, or the optional practical training requirement that you can use up. And in order to be enrolled in the OPT, or in order to be part of the OPT whole system, I would say you need to have something called as an EAD, or like employment authorization document. So essentially, the moment you receive your EAD card, so you file an application right before graduation. You say, well, here's what I'm going to graduate in a few months. I want to start working and I'm going to look for a job. So the moment you get your EAD card, you have 90 days from that date to find a job. So essentially, you get 90 days of unemployment period, which could either be fully 90 days or you can accrue 90 days over a period of time. So that being said, I was also in that situation. And I first began my job search, to be honest, a few months right before graduation, when I was initially of the impression that, oh, I don't have work experience in India, or at least post-qualification work experience in India, and I'm not going to get a job in the United States. Like, that was something that was very given to me. Like, it was not something that, like, I tend to believe a lot of people who kept telling me the same thing. So it was like, okay, it was more of I would like to call it a Stockholm syndrome. But then that was something that people kept telling me, and then I sort of started thinking in the same manner. But then a few months into my LLM, I got a research assistantship opportunity with two of my professors. I took that up and I ended up doing that for the whole period of the. Again, a few months into my LLM, I also happened to do the fellowship with Institute of International Economic Law, which was again a whole new different experience, and I totally enjoyed doing what I was doing there. So I think all of these experiences sort of led me into thinking that, well, if someone who had experience also was able to go through all of this, what's stopping me from doing that? So it was just until a few months before graduation that I really started taking job search really seriously. And I knew that my target would be think tanks in DC, because DC is also known for a lot of think tanks here, and definitely not law firms, because I've never been a fan of working in law firms and I've always wanted to work on the policy side. So my target was really think tanks, the World Bank, any of the international organizations, and yeah, so, and even nonprofits, for example. So some of the nonprofits here in the United States also do a lot of policy related work. So these were really my target companies. So when I started reaching out to people, like, I've received a lot of, numerous advice on saying, like, cold emailing never works. Don't do that. Don't cold message people on LinkedIn. I think that's what really worked for me. Like, all of the experiences that I have got today till date, whether it was in India or here in the United States, it was all through networking. Like, the first that was something extremely important that really pushed the needle for me. So I would say yes. And then initial challenges that I encountered was, of course, a lot of ghosting. So it's like I reach out to people, I have a nice coffee chat with them, I speak to them, I know more about their work, I tell them about myself, I build myself as a brand and then present it towards them. And then everything's nice. And then 1 week later, I receive no response. So I keep following up, I receive no response. Now, the same thing kept happening with a lot of places that I applied to. So I remember spending about a good 1 hour per application. So it means even if I did 10 or 15 applications per day, that would mean like a good 15 hours of my day is when all I'm doing is just applying to jobs. And so it's not just that job search really ends at, oh, I applied and then I forgot about it. It's also about making that little extra effort, finding those people on LinkedIn, working with that organization, asking them certain questions, asking them if there's a possibility of coffee chat. I think all of these is like a good, well-rounded circle, I would say. And then even after all of this, I think roughly about 50 or 60 applications later, I was at that point of life where my unemployment time was about to run out. I had lost almost about a good 30 days. And at the same time, I was also at the stage where every application that I'm putting in is getting rejected. So I think these were really like the biggest challenges for me. And despite of having invested so much of my time, so much of my effort, because I say that, looking for a full-time job is also a full-time job. So after having done so much, I was feeling a little saturated and dejected, I would say, just at the fact that, all my efforts are going into vain, nothing's happening. Where is this headed? So at that point of time, I think that was when really my first opportunity here in the United States sort of came in. And that was through a coffee chat itself. So I happened to speak to the hiring manager, and then she said, well, I'm going to have an internship opening very soon. It's probably in a week. Then she said, well, send in all your materials to me and then we'll take it forward from there. So, and then within 3 days, I was just tired. Like I had no time to process that and I was just tired. Yeah.
Wow. Firstly, thank you so much for being so candid about your experiences. I believe this is something that is so essential. It should be talked about because when someone's going for an LLM, they have this rosy picture in their mind that, oh, everything's going to work out. You're going to go there, you're going to a new country, the so-called US dream that every Indian, I think, kid has at some point in their life. But there is so many struggles that come even post an LLM, even after doing it at such a prestigious university. There are problems that you will face because that's a problem that everyone's facing. It's a same thing for everyone. So thank you so much for being so candid about it, and congratulations for securing that opportunity. Because I've talked to so many others who weren't able to do it because of several other reasons. But congratulations for that. And yeah, well, moving on, unlike in the UK, where there is the SQE, which is the route to legal practice, the US requires the bar exam. Could you share your insights on this process and whether you plan to pursue this route yourself?
So let me be pretty honest here. So I do not intend to write the bar exam anytime soon. Given the kind of work that I'm doing, even at my current role, I just recently happened to switch jobs, and even in my current role, I don't see the need for a bar exam. So if it's through peer pressure that someone is telling you, well, if you don't have a bar credential in the US, you're not going to find a job, you can hold me as example and say, well, she did everything, but the only thing that she didn't do was write a bar exam, and she still found a job. So I would say that's really just a myth. The only places where you would be needing the bar exam is to practice in-house, of course, because they expect you to have credentials just because you're giving them some sort of legal advice. Maybe even because if you're sort of representing that sort of company in court. The next thing where you would be requiring your bar credentials is, of course, if you want to practice law in this country. So that's pretty obvious. So for the fact that if you want to practice law, it's given that you need to write the bar exam. But here's the other side to the bar exam. I have seen my own peers spend nights together sitting in the library and just preparing for the bar exam because it's really that hard. So the question that you really need to ask yourself is, what's the purpose of why I'm writing the bar exam? Where do I want to land up? Because even if you want to land up in an international organization, not all the positions require a bar credential. unless and until it's like a counsel position, they don't really require a bar credential. So that is something that you need to keep in mind. The second thing is you want to ask yourself is, am I doing this because everyone else in my cohort is doing this? Because if that's the case, I don't think it's required, because I know like 2 or 3 other people like myself who ended up securing jobs. And I'm not talking about any other job, but pretty decent, good jobs in the United States without a credential. So I don't think like that's the end of the world if you don't write the bar exam. Like it's still okay if you want to write like the California bar, which is way easier, people say, than the New York bar. But honestly, I don't see myself giving the bar anytime soon. The only time that I might want to give the bar is when maybe I may want to become counsel for this current company that I'm working for. But that's too far-fetched. So I don't want to think about it at this moment. So that's really some things that you need to question yourself, because even sometimes academic advisors at universities sort of tell students that, you know what, if you don't write the bar, that's the end of it. You're not going to find a job and stuff. But I don't think that's really the end of it.
That totally makes sense. Now, considering with so many political changes that are happening in the US, the Trump administration, how does the visa sponsorship process impact the job opportunities for international professionals? And what are some common challenges in securing employer sponsorship?
So visa sponsorship is really for all the full-time roles. It's not for any internship, any consultancy position that you would need. So instead of working for profit companies, I would urge people to also look at careers in nonprofits. It's not like you're going to be paid very little or something. It's still going to be paid well enough, but you'll also enjoy the work you're doing. And I say this having worked for a nonprofit for a few months as a research consultant. So that's where this perspective is coming from. On the other hand, you might also want to look at other organizations, like international organizations who have a totally different idea to visa sponsorship. So they put us on a diplomatic visa, which is called as the G4 visa in the United States. And though that visa is something that really does not impact which administration is in power, who's in power, how the immigration policies are going to look at. So I think it's these non-conventional routes that we also need to pursue simultaneously, because looking at how things are going to go over the next few years, at least, I see a lot of problems. I sense a lot of problems rather in the immigration side. Because one, there is a heavy backlog of Indians waiting for their permanent residency in the United States. That's also a big contributor as to why a lot of employers are not willing to sponsor H-1B or work visas. So it is because of several factors that, visa sponsorship has become such a very contentious issue that not everyone wants to do it. At the same time, a lot of employers see this more as a liability than an asset. Like they don't want to hire international graduates because that's more of a liability and not an asset. So I think these are some of the common challenges, but one way to really get past all of this is to think beyond the H-1B visa, at least for the United States case. Think of other places where you could still sort of work as an independent consultant or do like a G4 visa consultancy where you're like working for international organizations. You can even find jobs in the embassies of various countries. Like they tend to put us on a government visa, which is something that you could also consider. So I think these non-conventional sources should also be an option in students' minds. Like H-1B is not the end of the world.
Wow, I think those are some great suggestions. Thank you so much for that. So, you recently secured a position at MediBlock. Congratulations. How did you land this opportunity and how did you feel when you received the job confirmation? And it's very interesting to notice with MediBlock and your journey, your parents being doctors, it's somewhat returning back to home and mixing your own passion with it. How was the entire journey with this like?
Yeah, so as much as I tried running away from the healthcare sector, I see how it's pulling me back into it. But jokes apart, this was something like a sudden decision that I just took up, said, okay, this is a great initiative that MediBlock is working at. Let me jump right at it. So basically, MediBlock is a startup that is trying to build a Bloomberg-like research database, but only for the healthcare sector. So here my role is to really analyze policies, again, policies and regulatory analysis, and present a strategy to the team that really helps them develop their product. So this being said, I feel like this is very coincidental in my life that most of the great opportunities I've found is all through networking. This was also through networking. Like, I feel like how if I rely on my back channels more, that helps me secure a job rather than doing something like, applying, doing the conventional stuff. And if ever, like, if you had to sum up my whole professional journey, you could just call it like how to successfully find non-conventional roles through non-conventional sources. I think that really summarizes me. But yeah, I think this was also through networking. So my dad happened to know someone who knew someone who's doing this work. And then, so when I connected with my current boss, CEO, he just like said, okay, well, this is great. This is what I was really looking for. I needed someone with policy expertise. Please jump in. So it was like I ended my previous job at the think tank. I had 2 days, I had a weekend to sort of just reset. And then Monday I was back to working. So it was like, oh, I don't really have much time. And I didn't really have much time to digest any of this either. So after all that rejection, after like 100 plus rejections, after having gone through so much of turmoil, I would say during the job search period, when this role really materialized, I really didn't know how to react. Like I didn't know if I had to be thrilled or if I didn't know I had to like pinch myself to say, oh, I got a job and I have to start working. So that was something like just happened out of the blue, but touch wood, I guess it happened for the good. So
I feel like you explained your journey so well that I feel like I'm part of this journey at this point. I felt so happy when you explained how you got this job, and it's truly amazing how important networking especially was. Do you have any quick tips or checklist when it comes to networking so that could help students?
yes, definitely, I would say like I would go for a 10-pointer checklist maybe this time.
Wow.
First thing, network. Like, I cannot underemphasize this, neither can I overemphasize this. And when I say network, it is like, it's not about just, reaching out to somebody, knowing somebody, but also building a relationship. Like, it's also something like you could ask them for help later. And at the same time, when they ask you for help, it is also important for you to give that help back to them. So networking is not really just cold emailing, finding people on LinkedIn, sending them requests. It's also about building relationships. Like, you should know that, okay, if I need some help from someone, I can go vouch for this person. That is what really networking is. The second thing is reading, and reading extensively. So what I mean to say is, as a lawyer, don't think that your job ends at reading the case or whatever material is given to you at hand. Sometimes it involves more than required, and trying to understand how different areas of law are really connected with each other. So, like, this was something very recent, and I'd like to say this out of experience because so my boss recently asked me to interpret an executive order that was signed by the Trump administration about 2 days ago, where he's revoking the ban of single-use plastics. And I said, well, what's the connection with this and MediBlock? And then he said, think. And then I said, oh, okay, I get it. Because if you're revoking the use of single-use plastics, that means more plastic is in the circular economy. That also means more problems for the climate. And when it means more problems for the climate, it means more problems for human health and human rights. And when that means that more people are going to hospitals, it means we need to fulfill shortage of medical professionals. And then when I told this to my boss, he was like, wow, this is really what I meant to say, that, I need an interpretation. So I think through this example, you need to really understand how important as a lawyer it is for you to keep reading a lot, and reading not just a lot, but also smartly. Like, it's not just about reading and then just consuming that information, but you should also be able to extract all that information and make sure you're able to link it with your own field, I would say. The third thing is really don't follow anything anyone says to you blindly, especially in law school. because a lot of peers tend to say things like, it's more important that you get like 15 internships or 20 internships. I mean, that's ridiculous. One, you'd be drained out by the end of these 20 internships. And when you focus on quantity, I'm pretty sure quality is going to get compromised. So I would say you might want to also think of it this way, that it's not just important for you to look at how many bullets you're firing, but how many actually hit the bullseye. So I would say something like that. The fourth thing, the fourth thing that I would really say for anyone, especially first generation lawyers, is your whole journey is going to be revolving around trying to convince your own people the work that you're going to do or trying to do. And I'm pretty sure it's not going to be easy. It's not something that everything's just served to you on a platter and you're just going to enjoy it. You will have to experience your own level of hardships, and that even means going out of your comfort zone. So if it means even like 1% to go out of your comfort zone, please do it. I don't think like I can emphasize on this enough as well. The next thing is have the habit of taking notes. Like right from the first year, first class of law school till date, I have like all my notes compilations still there at home with me. And I don't think this is something that I would like to underemphasize or overemphasize. Like that's very, very, very important. Even today, if my boss is giving me instructions over like a very long call or a meeting, I make sure I have a notepad. I'm not even someone who types. That way I'm very old school and I tend to note down everything. Like if you see my wall, it's filled with post-its everywhere. So have the extensive habit of taking notes. Sixth thing, I would say, take things at your own pace. Don't really, I see a lot of people wanting to get into law schools, but at the same time, don't just jump into it. It's also important that you take things at your own pace. Do things at your own pace just to figure out if you fit in or not. Because let's say you get into that rat race and then you're not able to figure it out. At some point, you're going to have that regret that, this didn't work out for me. And that time it'll be too late for you to switch. So I'd say take it out at your own pace, see where you fit in and where you don't. And at the same time, while you're doing all of this experimenting, don't keep doing it all your life. Like just maybe take like first 2 years of law school, take it slow, and then start figuring out your niche and then get into that. And the seventh thing that I would say is, so if you're considering moving abroad, understand that it's not as easy professionally as well as personally. A lot of people are going to tell you, oh, it's very nice. It's a very nice rosy picture that it's going to be out there. You're going to enjoy. You're only going to be partying every Friday. That's all. That's absolute nonsense. Don't go for such people's advice. In fact, if you're thinking of doing your LLM abroad, also be ready to make several sacrifices, personal, I would say tons of personal sacrifices. And the next thing would be, I think just sort of acquainting yourself with all the new ways of learning. I think you should have a more open mind. So not just if you're doing it abroad, but also if you're a lawyer, I think having an open mind really helps, because it helps you, I don't know, foster creativity in different ways. Like sometimes I would just not, like, at least this happened to me last week. Like I was feeling so stuck at work and I was not able to, like, give whatever my boss had asked me for. And then I told him I just need, like, a half a day's break. I'll get back to you. And I think that sort of having that open mind really helped me deliver results. The last three, I would say, are all interconnected. When you're writing any application, please don't make it a sob story. Be as honest, as truthful as you can. Not all admission committees would want to read a sob and emotional story and would like to just, get you on board because out of empathy or out of sympathy. That's the last thing that you want to do. If you want to really make a mark for yourself, do it out of your own merit, I would say. And then the 9th and 10th thing I would say is, again, when you're a law student, understand that this is a continuous learning process. It's not something that, you do like 5 years of law school and then 1 year of your master's and you're done. It's over. Don't even look at it that way. In fact, it is something that you have to keep learning, relearning, unlearning. All the kinds of learning that you need to do needs to be done. And taking an example, I would say this happened to me in my own experience, where I was doing totally unrelated work at the think tank. I was doing international trade and development work, sitting and analyzing foreign policies and international trade laws and whatnot. Then I moved to MediBlock, and then I'm doing a completely opposite side of the work where I'm analyzing healthcare policies, I'm analyzing healthcare regulations. I'm trying to understand how products can be developed just to ensure that we don't have a shortage of healthcare professionals. So have that open mind just to learn, relearn, and unlearn. Lastly, if someone tells you you can't do it, prove them wrong. So if someone really tells you you're a first generation lawyer, what do you know about law? You can't do it. If someone tells you that, please prove them wrong and do it.
That is some great advice. I feel like out of all the checklists that I've heard from you today, this was far the best one. Well, this brings us to the last and final question of our podcast today. For law students aspiring to build an international career, and I think you've already given us so many lessons, what are the three most valuable lessons of your journey, particularly, that you would like to tell them about?
I don't know, all the great things that happened to me after moving to the United States, whether it was Georgetown, whether it was getting that John A. Jackson scholarship. I was someone who quoted John A. Jackson like every fourth line in my dissertation. Like, I was such a huge fan of all the work that he's done. So when I got that name scholarship, I think that was something like, life came a full circle moment for me. And one way I was able to achieve this was, personally, I feel it was all the support I received from my family and my friends. And on the other hand, it was also me trying to really make a mark when people told me it's not possible, or, it's really hard. So it was on me to say something like, well, if you're telling me that, I will do it, and I will show it to you, I will prove you wrong. So again, circling back to my checklist, I would say have an open mind, really, because not just professionally, personally as well. If it means even like the slightest inch that you have to go the extra mile, do a little extra, please go for it. Please do it. Step out of your comfort zone. It's going to reward you at some point, at a later point of time in life. It's not like, oh, I stepped out of my comfort zone today, it's not yielding me results. It's definitely going to yield you results at some point. Be open to learning. Like, I don't know how many coffee chats have gone on, and people have told me, like, you know what, this is not the way that you speak to someone, especially way senior to you, and build yourself as a brand. Maybe you could look at it this way. Like, I do know, like, a lot of people who've told me, like, okay, if you've received such feedback, you might also want to think of it differently and tell them that, sort of reject that person totally altogether. So I would say don't do that. If they're saying it, they might be speaking from experience. If it really maybe hurt your sentiment, then maybe let it go. But otherwise, if there's something really to learn about it, think, introspect, and then sort of do that. And then maybe the last thing that I would say is, network, because that's something that cannot be understated, overstated, nothing. It's just approach it as it is. Whether you're an introvert or extrovert, just try making that connection. I know for most introverts, it's like a leap of faith. Like, they tell me, you know what, I can't speak to people very naturally. I can't talk to them. I can't ask them for favors. I say, I know it's a leap of faith, but take that leap of faith, speak to them. And also, networking is also really about understanding more about the other person, so you can also tell them how you can add value. So think about it that way. And I would say think about it like making friends. Like, if you just want to make friends, how would you do it? It's not like you're going to be very formal with your friend. But here it's on a more professional setting. So if you just look at networking as making friends, I think that's something that really pushes the needle. And I always say this to most people who ask me, like, how do I start networking, or what's the benefit of really networking, especially as a lawyer. So when I started working with my professors, Professor Jennifer Hillman and Professor Katrin Kuhlman, So both of them told me one very small bit of advice about networking. So they told me networking isn't really about, you knowing the famous people or you knowing me. It's about me knowing you, and it's about me recognizing you, me identifying you as an individual who can add value. So I think when you look at it at it this way, and also looking at it like saying, okay, networking is just making friends, I think that really sort of sums it up. So yes, I think these are the three most valuable lessons that I've learned in my journey, because as a first generation lawyer, it's took me a lot of convincing, a lot of persuading to get here. And two, it's also taken me a lot of moving out of my comfort zone several times to get here. So I don't think any of this would have been possible without of whatever decisions I took or whatever I happened to do for myself.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. I think those are such essential lessons that everyone should know, everyone should talk about. But yet I feel it isn't as much. That also brings us to the end of this podcast. It was such an honor having you here, not because how candidly you explained your process and how relatable it made to even me as a second year student. I could completely understand where you're coming from. I could understand at what depth you had to go through to reach where you are, and your journey has been so inspiring and so encouraging. And every decision you made, all the coffee chats, all the checklists, I think they have all amounted to a very positive, good decision. So again, congratulations from our side for that. And I understand this was your first podcast, but you're a natural conversationalist. I enjoyed this podcast so much. Thank you so much for being on here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you for making this as organic as possible. Like, I was a little nervous last night, but I think everything went well. So thank you so much for that. And it was indeed an honor having to spoken to you. And I'm really thrilled to be part of this great initiative. I think if it helps as many students, the better, because when I started my journey, I had like literally no one to like tell me from the very start to the end as to how I need to take it forward. But I think nothing harms if I can give back the same thing to society. So yes,
Very
thank you
true.
so much.
Very true. That was the intention behind this podcast, and hopefully we meet that. But yet again, thank you so much. And to our listeners, I hope you found this conversation as relatable, as candid, and as helpful as I did. Hope you kept listening. Thank you so much.